Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I welcome you to the fifth lecture on the course Organizational Behavior. Before we start with the lecture and the contents of this lecture, let's have a recap on what we have done so far and also on the last lecture specifically. So you see that we discussed already that organizational behavior is the study of how the behavior of the individuals is influenced in the organizations, how the behavior is determined in the organization. So it is particularly about the workplace behavior of the employees. And our organization is really concerned about the behavior of the employees at the workplace because that behavior has a number of important consequences which are important not only for the individual but also for the organization. So we discussed that from the perspective of the organization, it is important that employees' behavior should be aligned with the required behaviors from the organization, or the behavior of the individual or the attitudes of the individuals. They should be aligned with the desired strategic objectives of the organization, so that there is an alignment between the two and that leads to meeting the organizational objectives. So we started with the introduction of the organizational behavior. We discussed that what organizational behavior is, what we mean by that, why it is important to study organizational behavior, what are the different motives to study organizational behavior, what are the different antecedents, and what are the different consequences of organizational behavior. Right, and we also discussed that there are different determinants of organizational behavior. So we discussed that there are factors which are at the individual level that are influencing the employees' attitudes and employees' behaviors. There are factors which are at the micro level that are influencing the employees' behavior. There are factors at the macro level that are influencing the employees' behavior. And when we discussed the influences on employee behavior, we discussed all these different factors in great detail. We saw how the supervisor influences the employees' behavior, how do the co-workers influence the employees' behavior. We discussed how the culture of an organization influences employees' behavior, how the climate of the organization influences employee behavior, what is the role of senior management, what is the role of senior bosses in influencing the employees' behavior, and what are the other different organizational factors, such as the organizational environment, the task characteristics, etc., and so on. We discussed a number of factors that are influencing the employees' behavior. So we basically, in the study of organizational behavior, what we are doing is that we are trying to categorize, we are trying to basically study the employees' behavior, and we are trying to categorize the different factors that are influencing the employees' behavior, both at the individual level, at the organizational level, and the internal characteristics of the individual that influence the employee behavior. So the internal factors as well as the external factors, so the factors which are related to the individual and the factors which are related to the organization. So we discuss all those factors that are influencing the employees' behavior. Then with respect to that, we studied why it is important. In our subsequent lecture, we studied about the job attitudes and job satisfaction, and with respect to the job attitudes, we discussed a number of attitudes, how those attitudes are formed, what is the objective to study those attitudes, how those attitudes lead to behavior. We had a great discussion on all those different job attitudes and how those attitudes influence the employees' behavior, and why it is important to study the attitudes. Right, because previously we say that, okay, we study the behavior. Why? Because it is important to study the behavior. It is important to discuss the behavior because it has a number of implications for the individual and for the organization. Then we discussed that why we study attitudes, right, in our next lecture. So we saw that because attitudes, they play an the role of the mediator in the relationship between the different practices that are going on in the organization in order to meet the organizational objectives and in order to align the employee behavior in the desired directions. So basically these attitudes, they also, in a number of researches, they have also been explained to play a role of a mediator. So they are basically an answer to the black box, that how these attitudes influence employees' behavior in the different directions. Sometimes they are playing a positive mediating role, sometimes they are playing a negative mediating role, sometimes these attitudes are playing a moderating role, so they can have different capacity in influencing the employee's behavior. But one thing is established in research, that the employees, the different practices, different HR interventions, they don't have a direct influence, they don't directly determine employees' behavior, but employees' behavior is determined through attitudes, and these attitudes basically are also not directly linked to the behavior, as we discussed in great detail in our previous lecture, that these attitudes are not directly linked to the employee's behavior, but they are linked to the employee behavior through intentions. So first the attitudes are formed, then the intentions are formed, and then the behavior is formed. So that was our discussion. So far what we are doing is that, as we discussed, that the organizational behavior has different levels, and it is the study of the determinants of employees' behavior, the understanding of employee behavior within the workplace, within the organization, and how that behavior is caused and what are the consequences of that behavior. So it is the study of antecedents and consequences of employees' behavior at the workplace, in the organization. Okay, so when we established this thing, then we discussed basically we started off from the factors that are at the individual level, that how the factors at the individual level are influencing the employee's behavior. So we saw the job attitudes, and the job satisfaction, and a number of other attitudes such as the organizational commitment. We discussed organizational citizenship behaviors, we discussed performance, we discussed job involvement, we just discussed work engagement, we discussed a number of attitudes and behaviors, how they are linked, and how what is the role of different attitudes in the life of the organizations. Then we came to the topic of personality in our last lecture, right? And because we are starting off at the individual level, therefore we you see that these lectures are scheduled in such a way that we are starting off from the individual level, then we are moving to the group level, and to the level of groups, to the level of teams. We move further up to the level of the organization. So we are discussing the employee attitudes, employee behaviors, consequences of those behaviors at all these different levels within the organization. Right. Then in our fourth lecture, we discussed the personality and the personality traits, and what are the influences of the personality traits on employees' behaviors. So let's have a quick recap on the lecture 4, wherein we discussed that what is personality, what are different personality traits. We had a good understanding of how do we differentiate between personality and personality traits. What are the different personality traits? How do we measure personality? There are individual measures of personality. There is multi-rater view of personality, and then we also saw that the individual personality versus the multi-rater personality, they all have both the different types of measures of personality have their own positives and they have their own downsides as well. We also discussed the different determinants of personality, such as we saw that heredity is one of the very important determinants of personality. We saw the examples of how the two siblings who are twins, how because of the heredity there are the personality differences or similarities between those individuals. We discussed in greater detail all these examples. Then we also discussed the environmental factors that influence the personality. With respect to this, I'm sure I gave you the example of self-efficacy, or a number of other variables which are partly stable personality traits. So we discussed that they are considered partially stable personality traits, and it is important for you people to make an understanding of this distinction, that how and why are there differences between the personality traits that are stable or that are partially stable. So we see that there are some of the personality traits are stable and some of the personality traits are partially stable. The stable ones we discussed are those which cannot be changed, right? So they remain the same over time. They are inbuilt characteristics in the individuals, and the individual, even if the individual tries, it's difficult to change them. And then we also saw that there are certain characteristics that are partially stable, but they are still personality traits, such as I give you the example of self-efficacy. So we will also discuss the concept of self-efficacy in detail in our very much upcoming future lectures on motivation, when we'll be discussing the self-efficacy theory. Then I'll be explaining to you in further detail the concept of self-efficacy, that what is self-efficacy, how it works, and what it means, how it is different from self-esteem. You see, we saw that, we basically see that self-efficacy is how much confidence you have in your own self, that how well you can perform under different situations. So why we discussed it with reference to personality, that it is a partially stable personality trait, because one, it is in heredity, it is in you, right, that how much confident you are that you can behave well under different situations. But it can also be learned, it can also be learned through better education. When you improve your education, when you improve your professional qualifications, when you improve your experience, when you interact with people, you gain more confidence. When you perform something, you perform some task one time, you perform it well, then you gain confidence, you have more self-efficacy. So all these factors influence the self-efficacy, and all these factors we're going to discuss in greater detail. But herein, with reference to personality, we discuss that how some of the traits are stable, some are partially stable, how there are different determinants of personality, how there are different situational determinants of personality, and then with respect to all these, we also discuss the different theories. The situational theory, how it explains the personality traits are different, the personality traits are similar, how the situation moderates the relationship between personality and the outcome variables, how the individuals, they behave differently under different situations. So we discussed all these factors in our lecture on personality, and I gave you a number of examples to substantiate these arguments, right? And I hope that all that is clear. So I'm trying to give you a good recap on all what we have done so far and what we have done in the lecture on personality. So they are basically the highlights. So you can say that then we discussed the Myers-Briggs type indicator. Myers-Briggs type indicator we also discussed, and herein we saw that how this indicator examines that how different individuals they are, and they have different scores on personality, how that is measured, that which individuals have which personality types, right? Then we discussed the big 5 personality traits, and with respect to this we discussed, we saw that this is one of the very important, and it is basically, you can say that it is a breakthrough theory of personality, or in personality literature. This theory has gained very big attention, very huge attention. A lot of research has been going on this theory, taking this theory, because some of the researches, they show that the big 5 personality traits that have been developed in this theory, they cover all aspects of the individual's personality. So such as the extroversion, such as the openness to experience, and so on. So the theory basically discusses all those, the different 5 factors that have been explained in this theory. It has been studied in literature that it is so accurate, and it is so comprehensive. It so comprehensively covers all the different aspects of personality that when we consider all these 5 aspects of personality, we do not need to consider other aspects of personality. So of course that is some of the research, but of course whenever there is some research, whenever there is some theory building, there is always some contradiction to it as well. There is always some criticism on it as well, right? So we have to consider the both sides, and this is how the theory keeps on developing further, right? And this is how the advancement and this is how the development in theory comes as well, right? And because if there won't be any criticism, because some criticism can actually be very constructive criticism, and it can lead to further improvement. So unless and until there is criticism, there is constructive and positive criticism, it is it might hamper further development of theory if there is no positive and constructive criticism. Therefore, there is criticism on this strength of the big five personality traits that was been given in this theory, and that the proponents of this theory, because they gave this argument that is very comprehensive. So, the critics, some of the critics, they noted that no, it's not the case, because there are a number of other personality traits that are not covered, or some aspects of those personality traits, they might be overlapping with these personality traits, but they may not be completely covered, and still those personality traits, they may remain, they are not completely overlapping, and they are distinct. So some of their parts, they might be distinct. For example, political skills, you can say that is a personality trait which is, as per the critics, that may not be covered. Some of the aspect of political skills that might be covered under the big five personality traits, but that may not be completely covered, because you see that political skills is some of the dimensions of political skills, such as the individuals who are politically skilled, they are more astute, they are more sociable, so that might be covered under the aspect of, so for example, the agreeableness, because those individuals are more sociable, they're more accepting of others. Some of the aspects, they might be overlapping of these two constructs: agreeableness, which was given in the big five, and the political skills, which is not part of big five, but one aspect of political skills might be overlapping with one aspect of agreeableness. Right, but still they are distinct constructs. So this is the critic of this theory, the big five, and you need to understand that how there is this development on the personality literature. What is a critic on this personality literature, and how why that critic is made, and what are the influences of that critic, what are the other approaches to personality, what are the other theories of personality, right, and what are the other personality traits which are not covered in this big five theory. So we need to have a good understanding of all these different concepts. Then we discussed that outcomes of personality traits, wherein we discussed a number of outcomes of personality traits in respect of, but of course all those outcomes we are discussing with respect to the work at the workplace, outcomes at the workplace, because we see that of course our personality traits, what kind of personality we have, that has an influence on our whole lives. That is not only specific to the workplace, of course, right? So that is to our personal life as well. That is our family life as well, right? For example, you know, if you refer to your home case, so you must have heard your mom saying that your baba is, or your daddy is very stubborn, or some of your siblings, you might be hearing your mom saying that he is or she is very responsible, he or she is very conscientious, right? Some of you might be more risk-taking. So these are all the different personality traits that we discussed in our previous lectures, and we see that these are our observations which are not related specifically to our work life, but they have influence on our whole lives, the way we behave under all the different situations, whether they are at home, whether they are outside, whether they are in dealing with other people, right? Some of the people, they are easily, you know, you can they're very easily agreeable, right? And some others are not. Some people are more giving, some are more taking. So we have all these observations in our daily lives about other people, about how they are, about how they behave under different situations, and why that is partly coming from their personalities, right? Because that is their personality trait, and they cannot help it. That is inherent in them, right? That is heredity in them, that is inherent in them, and that is inbuilt in them. So there are some of the features that you cannot change in the individuals, right? So, of course, when we discuss the outcomes here, they were with respect to the workplace, that outcomes at the workplace. And we discussed, of course, those outcomes both at the individual level, what kind of outcomes they have for the individual, for the employee, and what kind of outcomes they have for the organization in terms of the organizational effectiveness, organizational productivity, individual effectiveness, individual's productivity, individual's performance, individual's work engagement, his job satisfaction, his organizational commitment. So there are a number of areas wherein these personality traits and the distinct personality traits influence distinctly the different outcomes. Then we also discussed the core self-evaluations, that how you evaluate, how the individual evaluates himself or herself, where he places himself or herself, and what kind of influences it has on the individual's own attitudes and behaviors, right? So we discussed in terms of the self-esteem, and we discussed in terms of the locus of control. So we discussed the concept of external locus of control, and we discussed the concept of internal locus of control, that how some individuals, they have internal locus of control, some other individuals have external locus of control, what are the how they behave differently, the two types of individuals who have internal versus external locus of control, how they behave differently, how their personality is depicted in their different behaviors, in their different reactions towards different situations, and so on, right? Then we also discussed the self-esteem, that how self-esteem influences the individual's behaviors at the organization. Okay, then we discussed some other personality traits. So as I told you earlier as well, many times, repeatedly, I have told you in the previous lecture when we were discussing it in detail, and now in my recap as well, I have been telling you again and again that this basically the personality traits, they are, one is the Big Five theory, which has of course gained very significant and very important place in the personality literature, but still there it has been suggested in the literature, and it has been agreed upon that there are a number of other personality traits as well that are influencing the individual's behavior, and they have that are validated personality, distinct personality traits. So we discussed the max, we discussed how and what do we mean by max, and how these people have distinct personality traits from the other personality traits that have been given in the literature. We discussed the self-monitoring, that what kind of individuals are self-monitoring. We discussed the risk-taking, that what kind of individuals are risk-taking, how we differentiate between the risk-taking and the risk-averse individuals, what are their consequences. We discussed the type A and type B personality. Right, so what categorizes type A personality, what categorizes type B personality. We had an understanding of proactive personality. What do we mean by proactive personality? What are the features of a proactive individual? Herein, it is important to remember that there is distinction between the proactive personality and proactive behavior. So proactive, because proactive personality is your personality trait, and proactive behavior is the behavior. That is the behavior that you're showing. So proactive behavior might be a consequence of proactive personality, but of course there can be a number of other determinants of proactive behavior other than the proactive personality, right? And of course, I'm sure that by now you should be able to differentiate between a trait and a behavior, and how a trait and a behavior are linked. Then we discussed the concept of self-efficacy, right? And I just in 5 minutes ago, I gave you a good explanation again of self-efficacy, and we are again in our next upcoming lectures, we are going to discuss this self-efficacy and the self-efficacy theory and the implications of this theory and so on. Then we discussed the political skills, and I also gave you an example of political skill now, and also in my previous lecture we discussed in detail about the political skills, the influences of political skills. In relation to this, I would also like to share with you that if you want to have a greater understanding and see further the details of these concepts, such as the political skills or proactive personality and employees' attitudes in terms of employees' commitment, etc. If you're interested in reading this literature further, then you can read one of my readings, which is a very recent publication in Asia Pacific Journal of Management. So this is on proactive personality and political skills and how it influences employees' outcomes. So it is a very interesting study which is done in Pakistan, collecting data from Pakistan, and you can see that how these different constructs, how they interact with each other to influence employees' outcomes in the South Asian setting. Right, so it is a very unique research, and this kind of research has not been done before, and it is a very interesting theory building, theory development, and for you people it would be easier to understand how the differences in the personality, they influence the different outcomes. So if you're interested, you can have a look on that. It is I'm also referring it to you because it's a very recent publication. Right, and latest literature on the personality traits, specifically the two that I have mentioned. Then we'll discuss the person job fit, and we saw that how the person and the job, they interact with each other, how they influence the individual at the workplace, and what type of influences it has for the employee's behavior and the employee's attitudes. Okay, then we of course concluded this lecture. Okay, now let's move on to today's lecture. What we are going to do today, I gave you a very detailed review of what we have done so far. I keep on giving these reviews, that is because of course I know that you are just undergrad students, and therefore what happens when we give this kind of reviews time and again is that important points of what we have done so far, they are highlighted, right? And so the points which are not to be missed, they are highlighted. So what we have done, the highlights of what we have done, right? And of course, when we are randomly doing this kind of recaps, we remember those things to tell you. When we are summarizing those things in a few lines, we pick up only those things which are most important, or which are the crux of the matter, right? And the rest of the matter relates to the details, right? So I pick up the crux, the summary of what we have done so far, right? So I keep on summarizing it, and also I give this kind of recaps of what we have done so far. So like before starting this lecture, I gave you the recap on all the 4 lectures that we have done so far. That is because to build your understanding on how we are developing through this session, or how we are developing through this course, right? And what are the different steps that we are taking to reach this course to its end, right? So starting from the introduction to how, and then also for your understanding on how it is categorized, how the whole course is categorized, and why it is categorized. So there is a logical sequence behind categorizing it the way it has been categorized. So in order to bring that in your understanding, it's important to have a recap after a few lectures of what we have done so far, or we discuss all the development that we have done. Okay, so today we are going to discuss the motivation, managing motivation, how to manage motivation. So this is the 5th lecture for today. Let's have a look at the outline. Let's see what are the main factors that we are going to discuss today, or what is the main theory that we are going to discuss today when we are going to discuss the motivation. So what is motivation? What are the different motivation theories? So first we are going to see what we mean by motivation. Then we are going to see a number of motivation theories, right? We start off with the Maslow's need hierarchy theory. We go to the ERG theory, which is also known as existence, relatedness, and growth theory. Then we move on to theory X and theory Y. Then we move on to two-factor theory. Then we see the McClelland's theory of needs. And lastly, we see the cognitive evaluations theory. So this is the agenda for today's lecture. So one agenda we have met, that was a recap, and the second agenda is the new topic that we are going to discuss today, right? And I hope that you are going to enjoy this topic. Why study motivation? So let's before understanding what motivation actually is, let's first see that why we need to study motivation. Why it is important to study motivation. Do you have any ideas why we need to study motivation? And what do we mean by motivation? Of course. So if we storm our brains, I'm sure you are able to come up to some of the answers, and I'm sure that those answers would be similar to what we are going to see in our next slides. But if you ask yourself why you are reading this course, or why you are taking this undergraduate degree, ask yourself these questions. When you are listening to this lecture, why? What is the motivation behind doing this? What is the motivation behind doing this undergrad degree? So of course, all of you have different answers, right? Why? Because everyone has different motivations to do it. So everybody might have different motivations to do different things. So, or even everybody might have different motivations to do one thing, to do the same thing. So imagine if you're sitting with, if you're listening to this lecture, or if you're sitting with your colleagues, or if you're sitting with your co-workers, or if you're even sitting with your family, with anyone around you, if you ask them that why they do this thing, why they do that specific job, or if you, for example, ask your class fellows why they are doing the undergrad degree, you will be able to understand that their motivation to do it is different than your motivation to do it. So their motivation to do an undergrad degree might be to get admission in a graduate program, simple. So they want to do undergrad because without doing undergrad, they cannot do a graduate program, they cannot do a graduate degree, right? So motivation for one person. So motivation for another person might be, he wants to do an undergraduate degree because after this he has a minimum basic level of education, and on the basis of this BBA or BSc, he can start taking a job that might be a part-time job, and then he can finance his graduate program or graduate degree, right? So in the afternoon maybe he starts taking tuitions or something like that. So everybody might be having different motivations to do this undergraduate degree, and same goes for the graduate program. So it is not only for of course for this graduate or undergraduate program, it comes in our day-to-day life, in our everyday life. Any activity, anything that we are doing, any activity that we are performing, that we have certain motivations that are going on in our mind behind our line of action, behind the work that we are doing, behind our attitudes, behind our behaviors, behind everything that we do. There are certain motivations involved, certain reasons for doing what we are doing, right? So let's pick up another example from everyday life. You want to lose weight. Your colleague, your co-worker, your family member, your sibling also wants to lose weight. What is your motivation behind losing weight? Okay, you want to look smart, yeah? And what is your family member or sibling's motivation to lose weight? Okay, because the weight is so much that it has become a health problem for her or him, and that's why she wants to lose weight, because she wants to keep maintenance, she wants to keep fit, she wants to keep healthy, or he wants to keep healthy, because otherwise it is becoming a health problem for her, it is becoming a health concern for her, it's becoming difficult to breathe for her because of the overweight, it is becoming to carry on her weight, right? So a number of different motivations behind doing exercise, behind eating less, or behind losing weight, behind the goal of losing weight. There are different motivations, right? So why you want to achieve that goal, there are different reasons, there are different motivations why you're making an effort. So that effort can be in you can say there can be different tools to make that effort, such as one is going to gym, one is going to eating less, one is going to follow a diet plan, or etc. or so on. So whatever the way you choose to achieve that goal, you have a specific motivation to achieve that goal, and everybody has a specific motivation to achieve that goal. So that goal might be the same, but the motivations to achieve that might be different. This is clear, right? So everybody has different motivations. Now, why we study motivation? Okay, you see that there was a survey that was conducted in America, and that's the results from that survey. They were very interesting findings from that survey. And you know what were those findings? It was basically a Gallup survey, and it showed that more than 55% of the employees in the organizations in USA, they were not motivated to do their work. So as a result, they wasted at least 2 hours of their work time other than lunch time. So other than 1 hour of lunch, they spent at least 2 hours of their office hours on either idle or doing those activities which are not work related, right? Such as most of it was the time was spent on chatting with friends or on net surfing here and there, right? So why? You see, these 2 hours of one individual per day and 55% of the workforce, if we calculate it and if we try to convert it into the amount of money that has been costing the organization, so it would be in thousands of dollars at least, right? So why employees were not working? Because simple, they were not motivated to work. They're not motivated enough to work, right? That is why they are wasting time. So what are the consequences? Of course, very big consequence for the organization in terms of the organizational productivity, lost productivity. Of course, if every employee, all those 55% of the employees, if they were working all the work hours in office, they were not wasting those 2 hours on net surfing or on chatting with friends, their productivity would have increased, right? And it would have substantially increased the productivity of the company, and it would have of those companies that were involved, and it would have substantially reduced the per unit cost of the companies, right, in terms of the productivity, because as a result of the reduced per cost of labor per unit production. So that is why it is important to study motivation, because when we don't know what motivation is, what is the mechanism of motivation, we don't have an understanding in the organization as a manager, as an employer, or even as an employee, that what's going on, what's wrong. We don't have an understanding, we cannot pick the problem, we cannot identify the problem, and of course then if we cannot diagnose the problem, then corrective action is not possible unless and until you're able to rightly diagnose the problem, right? So an understanding of these different issues is important, whether we are playing at the level of the employee in the organization or we are playing at the level of the manager at the organization. Okay, now we see that what is motivation. Motivation is basically the, you can say that it is the intensity, it is the direction, and it is the persistence, right? So you have any ideas what we mean by intensity, what we mean by direction, and what we mean by persistence? Intensity is basically how hard you try, or how hard you attempt to achieve something, to reach a goal, or whatever your desired end is, how hard you are trying, right? Direction is towards beneficial goal. So this means that you're directed in one way or in the other way. You have a clear path in front of you, right? You know that you have to take this path. You have a clear direction, a clear path, right, to achieve that goal, whatever that goal is. And the persistence is how persistent you are in making that effort. So these are basically the three elements that define motivation, that this is motivation, right? So unless and until all these three elements are present, we cannot say that a person is motivated. So this is actually interesting. Let's again come back to some example, right? Let's come up with the example of losing weight again, right? So if you want to, for example, reduce 10 kilos in 2 months, right? So for that you need to work out, for example, at least 1 hour every day, but you are working 30 minutes every day, so you are not putting in the effort at the intensity that is required to achieve that goal. So the intensity of effort is not as per requirement. Intensity is not enough. How hard you are making an effort to achieve that goal is not enough in here, right? So intensity measures basically how hard or how light it is the level of effort that you are exerting, that you are putting in to achieve that goal. The harder you work, the more effort you put, the better the results, the closer the results, the closer you are to the goals. Then comes the direction. Of course, there has to be direction as well. So if you need to work out for at least 1 hour in order to achieve your desired state or the desired goal, instead of working out for an hour, what you're doing is that you're just walking at home. So again, so what does it show? It shows that your direction is not right. You're not putting your effort. You're putting a lot of effort, but that effort is not in the right direction. So a simple walk at home may not be a good direction to achieve that desired end, right? Or you keep sitting in your office from 9 in the morning till 5, 6 in the evening, and you consider that this is enough. But that's not the right direction to achieve that goal, right? So you need to have a good direction to achieve that goal, whatever goal you have set in. So of course, if you have to reach at one end where road A takes you, but if you pick road B, of course that cannot take you to the end where road A takes you, right, and where you have the goal to go there, right? So road B cannot take you to the end wherein road A is taking you. So you have to see whether you have chosen the right direction in order to achieve at the goal that you are trying to achieve. Then the persistence, that how persistent you are, how if you fail once, right? So if you had a goal that you will reduce 10 kgs in 2 months, but you are unable to reduce 10 kgs in 2 months, right? So you have been able to lose only 6 kgs in 2 months, right? So if you are motivated, you won't give up. You won't give up. You will keep on persisting. You'll wait for another month, that okay, in another month I will reduce the rest of the 4 kilos and I'll come up to 10. So that is persistence. Don't leave. Keep going. So keep doing it again and again. Keep doing repeatedly, right? So that is persistence. All these are the basically, so how persistent are you, that depends upon how motivated you are. So the more motivated you are, the more persistent you will be. So a person who is not motivated enough to reduce those 10 kgs. So when he sees that after 2 months the results are not as desired, he is short of the target, the person who will be less motivated, he will become even less motivated, and he will leave the task because it does not have enough motivation to reduce. But if he has enough motivation to reduce, he will keep persisting, he will keep doing, he will keep trying, he will not leave that task. So as we discussed, that unless and until one of these 3 elements are missing, your motivation is gone, right? It is zero, it is not enough to achieve that goal. So for example, if you are persistent, you try again and again, you are in the right direction, but you're not working that hard, right? You're not working intensely. right? So if you're continuously doing gym for months and months, for years and years, right, and but you are not putting in enough effort, then you cannot again achieve your goal. Similarly, if you are putting a lot of effort, right, you're in the right direction, but you're not persistent. If you leave it after 15 days, 20 days, 1 month, 2 months, right, you become desperate, you leave it, you feel that you cannot do it, or due to whatever reasons, it means that you're not motivated enough, and again you leave it, and as a result, you're again end result, you won't be able to achieve your end result because one of the element of motivation is missing. So all these 3 elements should be there for a person to be motivated and for a person to reach at his desired ends or the desired goals. Okay, now let's discuss the different theories of motivation. So we'll start off with the old theories of motivation, and we discuss in here the Maslow's theory of motivation. Maslow's theory is basically one of the oldest theories of motivation. So all these old theories of motivation, they were basically given in the 1950s, right? And they of course we'll see that how they're they have been criticized a lot, but at the same time, since they are the oldest theory of motivation, and they are the explanations on how the employee motivation takes place, why employees are motivated, how employees are motivated, what are the outcomes, etc. So they were the first explanations on the motivations of the employees. That is why they have their significant place in the literature on organizational, whether we pick up the organizational behavior literature, whether you pick up the economics literature, whether you pick up the psychology literature, the organizational psychology literature, industrial psychology literature, economics literature, whichever domain, whichever area, whichever literature you pick up, you will find these theories of motivation, starting off with the old theories of motivation. So these are basically the need theories of motivation because they explain the motivation in terms of the needs of the individuals. That how certain needs of the individuals, when they are met and when they are not met, how they influence the employees and their outcomes. So starting off with the physiological needs, basically this theory, it distinguishes the human needs into a pyramid of needs, and it says that initially there are some basic needs of the individuals. When those needs are met, then we move up the pyramid to the higher order needs, right? So it starts off with the physiological needs of the individuals, and the theory says that these needs, such as the hunger, thirst, such as the shelter, need for sex, need for other bodily needs, they're basically the basic, that they're your physical, they are your bodily requirements, they're your physical requirements, and unless and until you meet those needs, you cannot think up of meeting some other needs. Think of yourself that, of course, unless and until your hunger, your thirst, they are satisfied, you cannot move up, right? So they're your basic needs. Your shelter needs, such as, and other such physical and bodily needs. Then are your safety needs, right? You see that your safety needs, what comes in here? Your need for security, need for protection from physical and emotional harm. They are the safety needs now, right? So you need a physical as well as the emotional security in here. Unless and until you feel that you're safe and secure, of course, one, when you're satisfied, when you have eaten to your tummy is full, right? You are not thirsty, your other physical needs are met, then you think up of your safety needs. So you don't think up of your safety needs unless and until your hunger needs. If you're hungry, a hungry person doesn't think of anything else, right? So when those needs are met, then you come up to your safety needs. So that is the next level of at the pyramid, the safety needs. So once the safety needs are also met, then the individual goes to the social needs. The social needs are the ones which are basically the needs for the belongingness, the need for acceptance, the need for affection, etc. Right? So of course everybody has social needs. You want to have a sense of belonging, you want to have a sense of affiliation with others, you want to have a sense of affection with others. So these are your social needs. So once your basic needs are met, then you think of meeting your social needs, and once those needs are also met, then you think up of meeting the self-esteem needs or the esteem needs. So esteem needs are basically the need for self-respect, the need for autonomy, the need for recognition, the need for achievement, the need for status, the need for attention. So everybody, whatever you are doing, you want recognition for that you have done this, right? You want certain level of autonomy, you want certain level of, what we also call the breathing space or autonomy. When we talk in terms of the organization or organizational environment, then we talk about autonomy, right, or freedom of doing tasks, right? So you need these, and you need to have some self-respect. You need to be recognized by that. So these are all your esteem needs. Once those needs are also met, then comes your self-actualization needs, right? So self-actualization is basically that you want to grow. That is your growth needs. So once your basic, your sociological, your emotional, your physical needs are met, then you think up of meeting your growth needs. You want professional growth, you want professional development, right? You want to self-actualize, right? So when individual comes up with, or individual thinks of meeting those needs, and then that is the top of the pyramid. So that is the self-actualization needs are at the top on the pyramid that was given by the Maslow. So what is important about this pyramid is basically that unless and until an individual has met his lower order needs or the basic needs, which are at the bottom of the pyramid, the individual cannot think up of moving to the upper needs or the higher order needs, which are the self-actualization or the growth needs of the individual. So what is the application? A homeless person will not be motivated to meditate. So meditation is what? Meditation is your self-actualization, knowing yourself, what you are, right? Your growth needs, your personal growth needs, right? So of course you cannot think up of meditation unless and until you have your basic needs met. You have a home, you have something to eat, you have something to drink. Unless and until you have met those basic needs, you cannot think up of meditation. You won't be knowing what meditation is. So individuals must move up the hierarchy in order as per this theory. So that is the important point in this theory, and this was also the important criticism on this theory, that the individuals, unless and until they are able to move, one of their needs at the lower level is satisfied, they cannot move up at the higher level needs. So they will move up the pyramid step by step. So this is also one of the criticisms on this theory. And other criticism on Maslow's theory is that this theory basically has not been tested before, because it's it examines the different needs, different levels of needs. Therefore, it is not so easy to test this theory. It's not easy to test the needs of the individuals in terms of cost, in terms of time, and in terms of other constraints that are placed on the researchers for measuring the different needs. It's not easier to measure all the different needs. Therefore, the application of this theory, it might be, it might appear very logical, and it might also gain empirical evidence, but it unfortunately remains untested because of these limitations in terms of research methodology and design. Then basically an advancement to this Maslow's theory was the Alderfer's ERG theory, right? And ERG theory is basically similar to the Maslow's theory except for a very few differences, right? So basically E stands for existence, and existence is similar to the Maslow's physiological and safety needs. So herein, this theory basically says that first the individual, the theory, as the name indicates, it divides the needs of the individuals into existence, relatedness, and growth needs. So existence is the first two hierarchies in the pyramid that was given by Maslow. That is the physiological needs, your physical needs, bodily needs, and your safety needs. Once those are met, so they are basically the existence need as per the ERG theory. Then the ERG theory says that the relatedness needs, they are similar to the social needs, the status needs, esteem needs that were given by the social and status needs that were given by the Maslow at the third level, right? So, and the growth needs, they are similar to the esteem and the self-actualization needs that were at the highest levels in the pyramid, which are the higher order needs as given by the Maslow in his hierarchy theory. So the only difference, so it only, instead of the 5 categories that were given by the Maslow in his pyramid, ERG categorizes these needs into 3 groups. existence, relatedness, and growth. And what ERG says is that what is the main difference between ERG and Maslow, that is it states that it's not necessary that the individual cannot move up the pyramid, or there is no pyramid, and it's not necessary that the individual cannot move up the pyramid unless and until the needs at the lower level in the pyramid are met, right? So according to this theory, an individual can simultaneously strive to meet the existence need and the growth needs, right? And similarly, the individual can simultaneously try to meet the existence and relatedness needs, and so on. So in all these different combinations, or all these three different needs, an individual can simultaneously try to meet. So just think up logically, think of your own, think of anyone else, that it's not that when you're trying to get food, or when you're looking for food, it's not that you leave everything aside and you're only looking for food and you're only wanting to meet your hunger, but you're also trying simultaneously to meet your other needs, right? So all those processes, they are going on in parallel as per this theory. But again, for this theory, it has the similar limitations, or it has a similar criticism that was for the Maslow's theory, that its generalizability and its testability remains limited. It cannot be generalized, and again, there is no empirical evidence for this theory, and therefore it cannot be widely generalized, or we cannot say anything about the validity of this theory. That remains doubted. Why? Because there is no empirical support or empirical testing for this, again for the same reasons as for the Maslow's theory that we discussed earlier. Okay, then we discussed the theory X and theory Y, right? So this is this is the next theory of motivation, and again the old theory of motivation. This theory basically says that the managers in the workplace, they distinguish between the employees. They see the different human beings differently on the basis of the different assumptions that they have about the different individuals. For example, it categorizes the human beings into theory X and theory Y individuals, and the theory says that theory X individuals are the ones that have they give little attention towards work. They basically dislike work, they dislike responsibility. So they avoid taking the responsibility, they avoid doing work, and they give little attention to details, they give little attention to work. So they are the theory X human beings. And as per this theory, the theory Y human beings are the ones that have inherent liking for the work. They like the work, they enjoy the work, and they are the individuals who are self-directed and they accept responsibility. So as we can see here, that the two categories of individuals, they are exactly opposing each other as per this theory. The theory X are exactly opposite to theory Y individuals, and the theory basically says that the characteristics, or basically the theory Y individuals, they are more self-actualizing individuals. They have importance for growth. They have their self-growth needs, and as if we refer it to the Maslow's theory, these self-growth and their self-actualization needs of the individuals, and these theory Y individuals, these features of the theory Y individuals, they dominate the other other needs, right? So therefore the managers in the workplace, they recommend that the individuals, they should be given autonomy, they should be given responsibility at the workplace, they should be given challenge at the workplace, so that these characteristics or these features can be highlighted, and the individuals, they are able to perform better, and we are able to take better work from the individuals. So as we see that McGregor believes that theory Y assumptions they are more valid. So the managers, they must encourage participative decision making. We'll have a whole lecture on participative decision making in our very shortly, and then we'll see that what are the different consequences of participative decision making. Also we'll see that how responsibility and challenge, they can influence positively the workplace, and they can that can positively lead in the workplace outcomes. Again, for this theory, there is no evidence that indicates which assumptions are true, or that theory Y environment will lead to more motivated workers. So if you create a theory Y environment wherein you provide challenge, you provide support, you provide sense of responsibility to the employees, of course there is again the practical evidence, empirical evidence of the theory that remains limited. It is, of course, these are only the assumptions, they are untested, and it is not for sure that if that environment is provided to the individuals, they will actually be motivated to work that way, right? So they will actually be show those characteristics which are shown or which are assumed for the theory by individuals. Herzberg gave a very interesting theory on motivation, right? And there are also a few strengths of this Herzberg's theory, right? So basically he says that previous to this, as you have seen in the previous theories of motivation, motivation has been a unidimensional concept, right? So one of the main contributions of Herzberg's theory is that he basically gave the distinguish between the intrinsic motivation and the extrinsic motivation. And as you will be seeing here, that how he is basically discussing the individuals or employees' attitudes, behaviors, consequences, the motivations in terms of extrinsic and in terms of intrinsic motivations, and how he is discussing at the workplace that what are the determinants of those two different types of motivations. So in the previous theory, we did not see that how we specifically did not see in terms of the unique determinants of the intrinsic and extrinsic motivations of the individuals. But herein we are going to see the unique determinants of the two different motivations, such as he says that there are certain hygiene factors in the organization or in the environment, and there are certain motivators, right? So what he calls the hygiene factors, he says that salary at the workplace, working conditions, company policies, so these are all the hygiene factors. So basically he says that all these tangible factors, such as how much pay you will get, what will be the level of promotions that you are getting, what is your salary, what are the increments, what are the bonuses, what is the other tangible or work environment or the material work environment or the monetary benefits, etc. These are all basically the hygiene factors. So basically he says that hygiene factors are related to the extrinsic motivation. And if these hygiene factors are not present in the organization, that will lead to the dissatisfaction of the individuals. And he says that on the other hand, the motivators, they are basically linked to the long-term intrinsic benefits or intrinsic motivation of the individual. So and how he defines motivators in terms of the achievement, sense of responsibility or autonomy that you have in the workplace, the growth opportunities or the growth possibilities that you have in the workplace. So those are the factors which are the motivators for an employee in the organization. So if the organization is providing, according to this theory, an individual with the hygiene factors, such as a good pay, good salary, increments, bonuses, etc., then that might lead to meeting the extrinsic motivation of the individual, but intrinsic motivation will not be met. So according to this theory, intrinsic motivation of the individual will be met only through the motivators. And the theory basically is, okay, herein let me explain to you, I must make a clear distinction between the extrinsic and the intrinsic motivation for those of you who are still unclear or who are unclear or who don't know or for whom it's a new concept or still a new concept. Extrinsic motivation is basically your motivation to do something because of some extrinsic is from external, because of some external factors. So external factors are motivating you to do something. And intrinsic motivation is because you're doing something, or doing some activity because you want to do it, because you like to do it, because you enjoy to do it. So intrinsic motivation is internal to the individual, that motivation to do something which is internal to the individual. And extrinsic motivation is something that is that you are doing something or some activity because of the external rewards, external benefits, etc. Right, and now we see that how Herzberg differentiates between the extrinsic motivation and intrinsic motivation, and he explains that these two types of motivations in the workplace, they have their unique different determinants. Hygiene factors determine the extrinsic motivation and motivators determine the intrinsic motivation. So Herzberg further says that extrinsic motivations or the hygiene factors are sufficient to take the short-term work from the individuals, so it is not a long-term work. So if the organization, for example, wants to achieve a sales target of 100 million, right, it wants to achieve a market share of for example, raise its market share by 15% in this month, and it says to the employees that its sales department or the marketing department that if you're able to achieve this target, you will get a bonus, right? So herein what is happening is that the employees will increase their marketing efforts, they will intensify their efforts, right? So why? Because they are motivated to achieve that bonus. So that bonus is the extrinsic element, it is the hygiene factor, because it is a monetary benefit, it is an external benefit to the individual, right? On the other hand, if an individual is putting in a lot of effort because that individual wants to increase the productivity and sales of the company because of his loyalty with that company, or because he's liking that activity, that is why he's making very intensified efforts, because he's enjoying that. And as a result of that, that has led to increase in the company's market share, right? Now herein this activity is not tied to any bonus, so there is no hygiene factor involved, but it is tied to the motivator, because that individual finds enjoyment in doing it, he feels that it is good for his growth, he feels that it is his responsibility, right? And he feels a sense of achievement, that is why he's doing that activity. So it is totally intrinsic, it is totally his internal matter, that why he's doing that activity. It is not linked to any outside rewards. So that is intrinsic motivation, right? And these are the motivators, and this is how the theory says that motivators are linked to intrinsic motivation and hygiene factors are linked to extrinsic motivation, right? So here is the comparison of satisfiers and dissatisfiers that is given by the Herzberg's theory, and he says that on the left hand side of this chart, or this if you see that he has given a list of the factors that lead to extreme job dissatisfaction. So if these events, they're not there, so if these are basically on the left side, you can see that these are the hygiene factors. So the theory basically says that if the hygiene factors are not there, they will lead to highest job dissatisfaction. And on the other hand, on the right side of this chart, if you see that there are the motivators, and the theory says that if the motivators are absent, then that will lead to the extreme, there won't be any job satisfaction, right? But there won't be any dissatisfaction, but there won't be any job satisfaction either. So from here, I think the time is up for this lecture. One or two of the theories. So this Herzberg's theory, we are still to finish this Herzberg's theory, and then we'll be discussing the other theories of motivation, including the cognitive evaluation theory of motivation. That was basically the agenda for this lecture, but because we had a detailed review of what we have done so far, so the agenda is not fully covered. So what we do is that in our next lecture, lecture 6, we'll be starting off, when we do the recap for this lecture, we'll also discuss in detail the cognitive evaluations theory and the leftover of the Herzberg theory, and then we move on to the other theories of motivation during our next lecture. But of course the contents for the cognitive evaluation theory and the Herzberg's theory, they are all in here in the PowerPoints for the lecture 5, and you can refer to that, and for the details on that you can listen to the lecture 6 for the details of the slides that are in here in lecture 5, right? So I hope this is clear, and I hope you enjoyed today's lecture. With all my best wishes, I would say goodbye to you, and I see you next time in lecture 6. Thank you. Allah Hafiz.